What happens when a Hollywood icon walks into a national TV studio expecting a routine morning chat, only to find himself ambushed in front of millions? What happens when charm meets confrontation? When diplomacy gives way to indignation? And when a celebrity, so used to managing every moment of his public persona, is cornered live on air by a journalist with an agenda? Well, what happened that morning on Good Morning America was not just an interview. It was a reckoning, a clash of power, perception, and pride. Before we get into the details, don't forget to subscribe to Narrative Nest, your go-to place for behind-the-scenes stories Hollywood wishes you'd never hear. Now let's get into what really happened. Brad Pitt wasn't nervous that morning. In fact, he was unusually relaxed. The makeup crew even mentioned it. The way he joked about the fluorescent lights, asked how the coffee was made so strong, and laughed about how early call times never seemed to get easier, no matter how long you'd been in the industry. He was there to promote his latest film, a deeply personal project, one he had spent years shepherding from script to screen. It was supposed to be a triumphant moment, but no one in the studio that day could have predicted the storm that was coming. And it all started with a smile. George Stephanopoulos welcomed Brad with a trademark grin and an open posture, the kind he'd used for years to disarm politicians and celebrities alike. "Brad, thank you for joining us this morning," George began, the lights warming the space as cameras rolled. "You look great as always." Brad nodded, smiling back. "Thanks for having me, George. Always a pleasure." That's when the tone shifted. Subtly, but unmistakably. "Let's talk about your latest project," George continued. "But before we do, I think our viewers deserve a little honesty about what's really been going on behind the scenes in your personal life." The words hung in the air. Even the camera operators stiffened slightly. Brad's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, George," he said, adjusting his jacket. "I came here to talk about the film. If you want to discuss my work, I'm happy to do that. But I'm not sure what you're getting at." George leaned in, his voice adopting a sharper edge. "Come on, Brad. We both know there are stories out there. Stories about your behavior on set. About how you treat people. Don't you think the public has a right to know who they're really supporting when they buy tickets to your movies?" The shift from friendly banter to confrontation was jarring. Brad's body language changed almost instantly. He sat upright, his jaw tightened, and the smile was gone. "George, this is pretty unprofessional," he replied, his voice cool but firm. "You invited me here to discuss my film, and now you're ambushing me with gossip and innuendo." George didn't back down. "I'm asking about accountability," he said. "These aren't just random rumors. These are consistent stories from people who've worked with you." "Anonymous people," Brad shot back. "Tabloids. Whispers. If there's evidence, let's see it. But I'm not going to sit here and entertain baseless attacks on live television." The studio was silent. Everyone, from producers in the control room to viewers at home, could feel it. Something had gone very, very wrong. George pressed harder. "So you're denying everything? Every story, every allegation, it's all false?" "What I'm saying," Brad replied, leaning forward, "is that this isn't journalism. You're not asking questions, you're prosecuting. And you're doing it with nothing to back it up." The conversation, if you could still call it that, was spiraling. Crew members shifted nervously. The live feed didn't cut. No one dared to stop it. This was television gold, even if it was a public relations nightmare in the making. George's tone became combative. "Maybe you just can't handle tough questions. Maybe you're too used to everyone protecting your image." Brad stood. The sudden movement caught the attention of everyone in the room. "You know what, George?" he said, his voice rising. "I think we're done here." George remained seated but didn't soften. "Sit down, Brad. We're not finished. You came here to be interviewed. That means answering questions, even uncomfortable ones." "I came here to talk about my work," Brad shot back. Not to be dragged through the mud on national TV. It wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was a full-blown clash. Ego versus ego. Reputation versus ratings. George raised his voice. People have the right to know. You've had assistants quit, drivers complain, makeup artists walk off set. Are they all lying? Brad's voice dropped, low and dangerous. Have any of them come forward? Have any of them gone on record? Or are you just repeating gossip as if it's gospel? George pointed his finger, jabbing the air between them. Sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire. And there's been a lot of smoke around you for a long time, Brad. That's when Brad lost it. He stepped closer. Not aggressively, but with purpose. You don't get to drag my family into this, he said. You don't get to turn my life into some tabloid headline just to boost your ratings. You've had 3 marriages fall apart, George said, not backing down. What does that say to people watching at home? What kind of example are you setting? Brad's eyes narrowed. Those were real people. My children. My partners. And you're using them for spectacle. The room was electric now. Every eye was on the 2 men. Every second was being broadcast live. I'm pointing out patterns, George said. Patterns that people should be aware of. You're exploiting pain, Brad snapped. You're not revealing truth. You're feasting on someone else's struggles. George crossed a line, and he knew it. But instead of retreating, he doubled down. Maybe the real problem is that you've gotten away with this for too long. Maybe it's time someone held you accountable. Brad's voice, once measured, now carried fury. Held accountable for what, George? For gossip? For rumors? You're trying to destroy someone based on whispers. That's not brave. That's cowardly. George didn't blink. You're protected by handlers, by the Hollywood machine. Maybe the reason people haven't spoken up is because they're scared. That, Brad replied, is the most dangerous thing you've said yet. You're accusing me of intimidation, of abuse, without evidence. Do you understand how serious that is? George raised his voice again. You have a reputation. People talk. Maybe it's time the public hears it. Brad shook his head. You think you're doing something noble, George. But all you're doing is showing the world how far journalism has fallen. The producers were in chaos. Should they cut to commercial? Should they stop the interview? But no one wanted to move. No one wanted to miss what came next. George took another step forward, getting in Brad's space. You're used to getting away with everything. That ends today. Brad's eyes burned. You think this is about me? No, George. This is about you. About your ego. About your need to be the guy who takes down a celebrity. Security guards began to step forward. Slowly. Cautiously. It was clear things had reached the breaking point. George kept pushing. Maybe the public should know the truth before they buy another ticket to your movie. And maybe, Brad said, stepping back, the public should know how you ambush guests, twist facts, and turn interviews into attacks. You think you've done something here, George. But all you've done is expose yourself. You've shown the world the ugly side of media. And I hope, for your sake, that it was worth it. With that, Brad Pitt walked off the set. The cameras kept rolling. The silence in the studio was deafening. George stood alone, chest heaving, face flushed, staring into the void of a broadcast that had spun completely out of control. So, what really happened on that stage? Was this journalism? Or was it something far more toxic? An ego trip disguised as an interview? What's clear is this. Lines were crossed, reputations were bruised, and one of the biggest names in Hollywood was forced to walk out of a place he once trusted. The silence after Brad Pitt walked off the Good Morning America set was almost unbearable. Not just in the studio, but across living rooms, break rooms, and online streams across the country. Millions had just witnessed the implosion of what was supposed to be a polished, scripted segment. What they got instead was raw, unpredictable, and deeply uncomfortable television. George Stephanopoulos remained standing in the center of the studio, chest rising and falling, hands trembling slightly. The glow of the camera lights was no longer warm. It was scorching. He had gone too far, and everyone in the room knew it. The control room buzzed with confused instructions. Cut the feed. No, keep it rolling. Switch to weather. Go to commercial. But the damage was already done. Inside the building, Brad Pitt was escorted down the hallway by two members of the security team. Not because he was a threat. He wasn't. But because the producers feared the chaos that might erupt if anyone tried to confront him again. The hallway echoed with his footsteps and the barely audible voice of one of the security guards whispering, "Sorry, Mr. Pitt. This wasn't supposed to happen." Brad didn't reply. He was too furious, too shocked, too hurt. Not because someone had asked a tough question, but because what happened wasn't about accountability. It was about humiliation. A man walked into a studio to share art, and walked out being treated like a criminal. Outside the building, paparazzi had already gathered, their lenses hungry for any sign of drama. Brad didn't speak. He didn't wave. He didn't perform. He simply got into the black SUV waiting for him and shut the door behind him, his face expressionless, but his mind racing. Meanwhile, back in the studio, chaos was still unfolding. Producers huddled behind the set, phones were ringing off the hook, and legal advisors were already being looped in. George was pulled aside by an executive producer who whispered harshly in his ear, "You went off script. Way off. What were you thinking?" George's answer was defiant. "I was thinking about the truth, about what viewers deserve to hear." But deep down, even he knew, this wasn't about truth anymore. It had become something else. Something personal. Social media was already exploding. Within minutes, hashtags like hashtag Brad Pitt walks out and hashtag GMA clash were trending worldwide. Clips of the argument were being uploaded, analyzed, meme-ified. Viewers were divided. Some hailed George as brave for asking the tough questions. Others slammed him for ambushing a guest and turning an interview into a courtroom cross-examination. And then came the think pieces, the media breakdowns, the pundits dissecting every word, every gesture. What did Brad mean when he said George crossed a line? Was it fair to bring up personal life in a professional setting? Did George have evidence for his claims, or was he grasping at smoke to start a fire? News outlets picked up the story within the hour. Brad Pitt storms off live interview, one headline read. George Stephanopoulos confronts Pitt on abuse allegations, said another. Networks scrambled for exclusives. Publicists from all sides issued vague statements. But there was one voice that remained silent, Brad's. For 24 hours, he said nothing. No tweets. No interviews. No prepared remarks. Until, finally, the silence broke. A handwritten letter. Yes, handwritten, was shared via Brad's official channels. It was scanned and uploaded. A statement, raw and unapologetic, addressed not to the media, but to the public. I came on Good Morning America to talk about a film that means everything to me. What happened on that stage was not an interview. It was an ambush. I've never run from tough questions. I've spent my life in front of cameras, answering more than I should. But what I won't do is allow someone to assassinate my character on live television without a shred of evidence. My personal life is just that. Personal. It involves people I love. My children. My family. My colleagues. To drag them into a segment meant to promote creativity and art was reckless and cruel. This is not the standard we should be setting for public discourse. We can ask difficult questions without destroying each other. We can hold each other accountable without turning people into punching bags for ratings. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. But I own those mistakes. What I won't own is the narrative that was shoved down my throat by someone who didn't come to listen, only to attack. I thank everyone who reached out with support. And I hope we can have better conversations. More honest ones, without cruelty. Sincerely, Brad. The internet lit up again. Fans rallied behind him. Other celebrities chimed in. Several A-list actors, some of whom had been interviewed by George in the past, spoke up about their own discomfort with the host's methods. One Oscar-winning actress tweeted, "This is why we need safe spaces for artists to speak, not interrogations disguised as journalism." Meanwhile, George found himself on the defensive. The network, sensing the backlash, announced they were conducting a review of the incident. George's defenders insisted he was just doing his job, asking the questions people were afraid to ask. But even among them, there was discomfort. The interview hadn't just crossed a line, it obliterated it. Behind closed doors, network executives scrambled. Ratings had spiked, but so had complaints. Advertisers weren't pleased. Viewers were writing in droves. And while controversy might fuel clicks, it doesn't build trust. George issued a statement of his own days later, but it lacked the sincerity of Brad's message. It was filled with phrases like editorial discretion and journalistic responsibility. It didn't acknowledge the personal nature of the attack. It didn't apologize. And that silence spoke volumes. The next week, Good Morning America returned to its normal programming. Cooking segments. Celebrity guests. Light banter. But something had changed. Viewers noticed. There was tension in the air, like everyone was afraid of what might happen next. Brad, on the other hand, disappeared for a while. He didn't cancel appearances, but he didn't seek them either. He returned to promoting his film quietly, through select outlets and interviews that were pre-recorded, tightly managed, and free of unnecessary drama. But people were still talking. About what had happened. About what it meant. About the invisible line between journalism and spectacle. Then, a month later, something unexpected happened. A former GMA producer, anonymous, at first, leaked an internal email. It revealed that the segment had been edited the night before the broadcast to include a set of surprise questions, many of which had never been discussed with Brad's team. Worse, it included instructions to escalate tone if met with resistance. It was a plan. A deliberate provocation. Suddenly, the narrative changed. This wasn't just a spontaneous meltdown. It was premeditated, and it had come from the top. Public reaction was swift and furious. Viewers felt betrayed. The idea that a respected news anchor would weaponize gossip to trap a guest on live TV wasn't just unethical. It was chilling. The network scrambled to respond. Executives held emergency meetings. Internal investigations were launched. George was placed on temporary leave. His absence was quietly extended week by week. And as the dust settled, the real question emerged, not about Brad or George, but about all of us. What kind of media do we want? Do we want interviews that challenge power with evidence, or spectacles that chase ratings through conflict? Do we want truth, or drama? Conversation, or confrontation? In the months that followed, Brad's film went on to receive critical acclaim, not just for the performance, but for the courage it took to stay composed during a nationally televised character assassination. George's future at the network remained uncertain. The GMA brand took a hit, one it might never fully recover from. And audiences? They were watching more carefully now, questioning more, believing less. Sometimes, the biggest confrontations don't end with an apology or a handshake. They end with silence. With reputations altered, with trust shattered and slowly rebuilt. But one thing became clear to everyone who watched that morning. Brad Pitt walked into that studio expecting to talk about art. What he got was war. And in that war, he chose dignity. And that, perhaps, says more about him than any tabloid headline ever could. If you made it this far, you're clearly someone who appreciates the real story behind the headlines. And trust me, there's more where this came from. So before you go, hit that subscribe button and join us here at Narrative Nest. Because the truth doesn't just lie in what's said, it lies in what they try to hide. Stay curious. Stay skeptical. And above all, stay watching.